Welcome, 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 everyone. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. ET, and we are so thrilled that you have found us here on A Mighty Blaze at Crime Time, where we talk about crime fiction every Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET. And today is no different. I am your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 13 going on 14 novels of suspense. My newest novel is Her Perfect Life. And the brand new one, as I always say, which you will hear about ad infinitum when the time comes, is The House Guest, sort of Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise. And we will be sure to be talking about that. But today, you all, I am so honored and thrilled to be able to bring you Katie Gutierrez. And I know that you will. I don't know. I fell in love with this book. I fell in love with More Than You'll Ever Know. It's, well, I can tell you about it is that it's incredibly acclaimed, starred reviews, Good Morning America book club pick. And as a reader, this book is so immersive, and the story and the themes are so riveting and haunting and thought-provoking. And I have to tell you that when I finished this novel, you see how I marked all the pages and started it. And I'm
I love
sorry
it.
for ruining this book, but it made it mine, I think. All I wanted to do was start from the beginning
Oh,
because I wanted to read it initially just to find out what's going to happen. It's such a page turner. I wanted to go back and really revel in Katie's marvelous writing. And Katie, I want you to talk, but I want to read one more thing. And this is what our darling May Cobb said about this book. Enthralling, heartbreaking, and propulsive. More Than You'll Ever Know is the kind of book that only comes around once in a decade. And I'm telling you, this is not an exaggeration. A groundbreaking, razor sharp exploration of what it means to be a woman in all its complexity, as well as the deep dive into the morally gray area of the double lives we all lead. And if you think you don't lead a double life, you will learn from this book that indeed you do. Equal parts literary tour de force and domestic suspense with a sweeping, sprawling narrative. And that is from May Cobb, who we adore. And we are so pleased to be talking with all. Look who's here, everybody. When I look over here, you all, I'm looking at the comments. And look who's here. I see so many people. Our darling Anissa is here, and Pamela, and Shannon Hansen, Shanson, and Janine. Gracious Henry says, goodness, I love this. Lynn Hahnemann, Catherine Holm, Renee, Diane, Sherry. Oh my gosh, if I read all your names, we would never hey, Valerie, be able to get to Katie herself. So let me ask you, Katie, first of all, welcome, welcome, welcome. And I know your kids are in the other room. So you all, if they come bursting in because they need something so desperately right now, that's what it's like to be a mother. And we can talk about that. So tell me about Good Morning America. What happened and how did you feel about that?
So I just had my very first marketing publicity meeting. I think this was back in January, maybe February. We met virtually and they were sort of giving me an idea of what to expect in the coming 6 months or so. And one of the things they brought up was celebrity book clubs. And they said that the book had been sent to all of the celebrity book clubs, but that they're all such a long shot, I shouldn't count on anything. And of course my reaction was like, yeah, of course I'm not going to count on anything, it was nothing. Yeah, right. And so the very next day I got an unplanned call from my agent and my editor, and, they never sort of call out of the blue. And so I answered the call and my editor, I missed the call. I had to text my agent back and say, can you call me in 5? I'm with the kids. And so they called me back and my editor said, well, remember how we were talking about celebrity book clubs yesterday and how it's a long shot, so don't count on it. Well, you're the GMA pick for June. And so at that point, I think I just instantaneously sort of burst into those like laugh sobs. And my husband heard me and walked into the room with this expression of, what is happening, what is going on. And when I found out that I was pregnant with my daughter, it was a very similar phone call, except his interpretation was flipped. He thought I had just gotten the book deal. And it turned out I had just gotten a call from my nurse saying I was pregnant. So when he walked into the room to see me having that kind of reaction, like, oh my God, thank you. I think his face was kind of like, oh my God, is she pregnant again? Which I'm kind of glad it was not that. So that was how I found out about Good Morning America.
That is the best story ever. That is so wonderful. He's saying, oh my goodness, are we having another child?
Yeah.
And so many wonderful things happening in your life. And indeed, it is another child. It's your book baby. right?
Mhm.
Kind of going out into the world to wild acclaim and spontaneous laugh sobs, says Marty Blaze. Of course, of course. And Renee says, I've had your book on my TBR list for a while. I cannot wait to read it.
Oh, thank you.
And I said, I highly recommend this. And let me tell you quickly about A Mighty Blaze if you're new. And I do see some new faces today, and that is marvelous. A Mighty Blaze was started more than 2 years ago by the incredible powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us talking about books during the pandemic and to keep us learning about new books and keep us meeting new authors and reading the books of our favorite authors and getting to know each other in this writing community. And that is what we are doing absolutely today with the debut author, Katie Gutierrez. Let me tell you a little bit about her. I'm going to read the formal bio so that you all know exactly who you're dealing with here. Katie Gutierrez is the author of the national best-selling debut novel, good words, More Than You'll Ever Know, from Morrow, Michael Joseph, which is also, as we said, a Good Morning America book club pick. She is also a National Magazine Award finalist whose writing has appeared in Time Magazine, Harper's Bazaar, The Washington Post, Long Reads, and more. She has an MFA from Texas State University and lives in San Antonio with her husband and their 2 kids, who we may see at any moment. I want to talk to you, Katie, about family and marriage and journalism and truth and obsession and your career and Cassie's career and your amazing writing style and women's careers. But let's talk first about, well, this is the point where I always say, tell us a little bit about your book. And I cannot wait to hear how you frame this. Just tell us a little bit about the plot.
Sure. It is about Laura Rivera, who is a South Texas woman who is secretly married to 2 men at the same time in the 1980s. She's also a mother. And Cassie Bowman, who is an aspiring true crime writer in 2017, who becomes obsessed with telling Laura's story. And it's really an examination of marriage, motherhood, female ambition and desire, and also our cultural obsession with true crime.
Yes, exactly. And the way that Cassie, the reporter, comes across Laura's story in the book is because she is obsessed with true crime, emotionally and professionally and sort of financially. This is how she makes her living. And that is such an interesting combination. Where did the idea for this story come from?
I think it actually came in 2 parts, one much earlier than the second. The first sort of spark of the idea came back in sort of 2009, 2010, when I came across a story that was already a decade old, so I'm not even sure how I came across it, one of those just internet rabbit hole things, but it was about a man who had been married to his first wife for 53 years. They had 3 kids together and multiple grandkids, and they were very successful. He was very successful, sort of pillars of the community. And when his wife died unexpectedly, he married somebody else 2 weeks later, which obviously begged some questions. And it turned out that he had been splitting his time between the 2 women 20 miles apart from each other, supposedly on business trips. And with this second woman, he had 2 kids. He had sent all 5 kids to the same elite prep school. Both women had served on the school board at the same time without knowing they had this man in common. And so I was really compelled by this particular double life story, I think because of the longevity of it, keeping it going for 32 years between these 2 families, and also how close he sort of let them brush, almost as if he wanted to be caught or didn't, I don't know, or enjoyed the thrill of that closeness. But at the time I was So at that time I sort of went down a rabbit hole of looking up other secret life stories similar to Cassie, and realized that they were really mostly almost all women. And it makes sense when you think about the reasons why it's easier, especially historically, for men to live a double life versus a woman. But it did make me wonder what would happen if a woman were to lead a double life like that. What would bring her to those decisions? And, is it possible to understand somebody who ends up in this place? Because I know when I read these secret life stories, I sort of feel this immediate revulsion, right? How could you keep these devastating secrets from the people who are supposed to be closest to you? And so I think for me as a writer, it's an interesting project to try to understand somebody who in my real life gives me this strong negative response. But at the time I was working on a story collection. This is for my MFA program. And it was, very different sort of project. And so I kind of jotted this idea down, set it aside. And then in 2017, I was actually on submission with another novel. And while I was trying to deal with the anxiety of waiting and getting responses and ultimately getting passes from everybody, I remembered this idea and felt really just as excited, if not more, to work on it. Because at this point, I was married. I had just found out I was pregnant. So I was sort of entering into this new phase in my life as well. And by then, I had sort of developed more of an interest in true crime, both enjoying it and also questioning my enjoyment of it. So, in thinking about this potential double life story, I also thought it would be interesting to have this journalistic frame narrative of the story, but I wanted it to be a frame, yes, but also a character who had her own very developed arc and without whom the book would be incomplete. And so that was sort of the two halves of the idea, which came more closely together once I started asking myself when and where it would take place, and then a lot of other elements of the story sort of began kind of coalescing for me.
I mean, one of the things that you mentioned was we ask ourselves, how could they do that? Meaning, sort of morally, and how could they do that to people that they love? And the other question is, how could they do that?
Yes.
How you actually lie in two different worlds and keep everything apart and switch your wedding rings and switch what you call people, when you're angry or passionate. There's things that are difficult, just sort of intuitive, that you have to tamp down. The thing about one of the things, many things, pages of things I loved about the book. One of the things I loved about the book is that Lori and Cassie, Lori, the woman who's married to two husbands, and Cassie, the journalist who's on her trail trying to untangle this, are both very obsessed, very ambitious, very complicated women who want everything. And you'd think on the surface that we, the reader, wouldn't like them. And I just loved them. I loved them both. I understood them both. You were so great at letting us see how people's minds might work, and what the lies we tell each other in order to have what we want.
Right.
Let's take Lori first and just tell us a little bit about her.
Yeah, so when the story enters in the 1980s, Lore is 32 or 33 years old. She's a successful international banker. She had been a stay-at-home mom for the first maybe 4 years of her twin sons' lives before returning to work at a bank. And from there, she sort of rose from a teller through to every position until her current position as an international banking officer. The book takes place it starts out in 1982 in Laredo, Texas, which is my hometown. And it was going through a devastating international recession at the time, which was sort of doubly impacted by the peso devaluation in Mexico. So Laredo, being a border city, is very much dependent on the income that comes in from Mexico, people coming in to shop, to dine, everything like that. And so when the peso devalued and it lessened Mexicans' buying power, all of a sudden, 700 businesses were closed in Laredo. A third of the city was out of work. And this was just a time period that I had grown up hearing stories about from my parents. And so I was really interested in the idea of setting Lore into this time period. As you said, she's a woman who sort of wants everything, right? She wants more. And what happens when you set a woman who wants so much into a time of extreme lack and struggle? And also, what impact does it make when suddenly the husband, in this case, she's married to Fabian, they're high school sweethearts, they have twin boys. And I see them as being in a pretty happy, solid marriage until Fabian's ironworks store begins losing business because of the recession. And so at this point, Lore becomes the primary earner, and Fabian is forced to move to Austin for sort of on and off to try to get business for the store. And he's sort of really grappling with issues of identity as well. And so I was interested in kind of what that financial upheaval would do to a marriage, and how this sort of major economic conditions could make a person or enable a person to act in ways that she maybe wouldn't ordinarily. What does our kind of macro environment bring out of us? And so that's Lore. So that's where we start. That's who she is when the story begins.
It's interesting because, again, one of the reasons that we're talking, if you just arrived, we're talking about the fantastic More Than You'll Ever Know by Katie Gutierrez. One of the themes throughout, and one of the reasons I want to go back and read it again, is that this upheaval theme is woven throughout, literally and figuratively and thematically throughout the book. And the same thing is happening in Cassie's life. Mm-hmm. She discovers this story, Laura's story, when she's searching for the most sensational stories possible. Mm-hmm. And she wonders about how she, as a journalist, is obsessed with other people's tragedies, and how we are too, and mm-hmm. wonders whether she's exploiting them. That's how she makes her living. Talk a little bit about that process and who Cassie is.
Sure. Yeah. So Cassie is also about 30. She's living with her fiance in Austin in 2017. She's been obsessed with true crime her whole life, ever since she watched Dateline with her mom every Friday night as a kid growing up, as possibly some of us did. And she when something happens between her parents that forces her to see them in a new way, she ends up sort of finding this strange comfort in true crime. There are times that she identifies with the victim or a person who is sort of hoodwinked in a way. And there are times that she identifies with the detective in terms of wanting to know what happened and how something can happen. And I think true crime sort of also kind of validates her own experiences in ways that she doesn't get in her real life, because she doesn't talk about anything that happened in her home as a child. And so when she grows up, she wants to be, an investigative journalist, but she ends up she wants to be, a crime writer. And so, but she ends up sort of writing for this pretty salacious blog. And it's very much about, finding these bite-sized sort of pieces of the most sensational stories that don't even require her to do any reporting. It's just purely summarizing. And she feels like, where is her life going? She's this sort of, she describes herself at one point as being a dirty cog in the true crime industrial complex. And I think that she is hungry for something more similar to Lore, except in her case, she wants it through her career. And so when she comes across Lore's story, she sees the opportunity to write about a woman who is not a victim, first and foremost, and she's not a white woman either, and which is sort of, tends to be the focus of so much of true crime, is the dead white woman. And so I think that she starts out telling herself she has good intentions about wanting to write sort of a more feminist true crime story, if you will, or be a little bit more on the moral high ground of writing a true crime book. But in the process of sort of meeting Lore and excavating Lore's past, even though, of course, Lore is not completely willing, Cassie then has to sort of confront questions about, what is exploitative in true crime? When does the power dynamics between, journalist and source become completely imbalanced, and what ultimately means more to her career and her ambition and her byline, or this real life family sort of at the center of the book that could make her career.
And I want to tell you that if you look at the comments, Valerie Brooks says just ordered it, and that is what we do here.
Oh, awesome!
Because we are so eager for you all to read this book, and thank you, Valerie, that you have just made both of our days. One of the things that you do so beautifully in this novel is, even though Cassie is the journalist who is ostensibly searching for the story, it's Lore who extracts Cassie's story parallel along the way. Had you planned that blossoming of both women's stories in parallel, and by way of each other, that they each learn from each other?
That was my intention, I'd say, the whole time. It was harder to pull off, I think, structurally, as well as emotionally. So I think it took a very long time to sort of get at what I was hoping their relationship would become, and how they would each become both mirrors and foils for each other in different ways, and sort of grow from each other as well. But yes, that was something I had hoped from the beginning, and sort of saw, you have a real age difference between them. Cassie's 30, Lore's 66 in the present day, or in 2017. And so there's already, one of the big questions when I started writing the book was, are these stories happening at the same time? meaning, is Lore in her 30s now? Cassie's the journalist now. Is all of this currently happening, or is there this big time difference between them? And I thought from my own writing perspective that it would be more interesting to sort of play with the relationship between a younger woman and an older woman, and the sort of dynamics that might bring out in each other. If Cassie's mom died when she was younger. And so I always saw Cassie as having this like void in her life that I think Lore would see and try to exploit. But I also very much,
I mean, she really does.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to. I'm just thinking that that journalism is not really supposed to be transactional. It's supposed to be someone telling someone else a story. But at the beginning, when Lore sort of makes a deal, I'll tell you one thing, and Cassie thinks, okay, I'll tell you one thing if you tell me one thing, and Cassie thinks, okay, sort of whatever it takes. And then we learn more about Lore's personality and her instinct and her savvy by what she can intuitively undersee about Cassie. So it becomes this chess game on both sides, not just on the journalist side. Let me read you all one thing that I thought was so interesting and thematic. It's the essence of not only the themes of the book, but the story of the book. And let me just read you all a tiny little bit. For every story told out loud, there is the story we only tell ourselves. And before I say this, what I was going to say is, when you choose, my computer just decided to search for something, and now it says choose a rats, close, everything close. I pushed something that said dictation. That's lovely. When you choose to make something happen in the past, and forgive me, you all, I'm just closing this window, which just opened on my computer for no reason. Closing it. How do I close it? Escape. No, I'm afraid to do that. Oh, this is fine. This is just, we'll just deal with that. We'll just leave it on the screen. When you decide to make something in the past, that allows for memories, that allows for us to retell our stories to ourselves, that allows us to recast the past.
Yes.
And then it comes out sort of being true enough.
Right.
When it's told. And I think, it brings goosebumps. I get goosebumps when I think about that. So now, since I've interrupted myself, I'm going to, it happens. I'm going to read a little bit of your book. For every story told out loud, there is the story we only tell ourselves. And behind that, somewhere, often out of reach, is the truth. The trick is telling them apart. And then a little bit lower, it says, because people aren't just murdered in moments, they're murdered in all the moments leading up to that final act. That's what makes true crime so addictive. Godlike, you're allowed to see the intricate chain of events leading to the end of someone's life. You realize that everything you do, every decision you make, might bring you too closer to the abyss. Briefly, your own life feels precious. And I just got chills reading that. That is just so the essence of the novel. Talk a little bit about how you felt writing that. Did that feel pivotal and momentous when you wrote that?
It did. And I really love hearing which lines resonate with people. And it's interesting to me, that line came, I think, later in the revision process, I think. But it was one of those lines that, when I wrote it, it felt like, ooh, like this is getting at something. This does feel like it's hitting sort of the heart of Cassie's relationship with true crime, and sort of thematically, like you said, what I was wanting to do with that aspect of the book. So I love that those lines in particular stood out to you.
And it crosses my mind that we have now talked for 24 minutes. How can that be?
Oh, wow, that was fast.
of this essentially murder mystery, and we have not talked about the murder. How much can you say about that, if anything? I think it's on the cover, though.
Yeah, you want me to talk a little bit about the murder itself in the book, or okay?
What happens? I mean, just the basic just the basic twigs.
Sure. Yeah. So, and that's a great point. We haven't even mentioned it at all. So, what catches Cassie's interest initially in this story is the fact that one of Lore's husbands murders the other. And so it's kind of this perfect, like dramatic ending to this story. And so it was what was publicized at the time of the murder. And but Cassie, what I think interests Cassie the most is sort of what everything that led up to that final act. As you know, you kind of read those lines. She wants to know what brought these three people to this place where one man shoots another. They're both married to the same woman. In the process of hearing the rest of the story, she starts to have doubts that the events actually happened the way they are supposed to. And so that becomes a much more, I think, important thread in their current day story than either woman probably expected in the beginning.
And love is such a powerful theme in that, because if you think about a love triangle and you think about one husband finding out about the other husband, would they be more angry with the double wife? Would they be more angry with her or with the other man? And that sort of emotional, moral decision is central to this book as well.
Yeah, and I think that is something that sort of fascinates Cassie from the beginning. You know, why would one man murder the other instead of taking out that anger on the woman when so much of the time women have to do so much less to be killed by an intimate partner, right? You know, one of the horrifying statistics that I found when I was researching the book was that, and I think, you know, many of us know this already, but the vast majority of women who are murdered in this country are murdered by a current or former intimate partner. And so I think the fact that the story deviates so much from the expected narrative is part of what captures Cassie's attention.
Yes, exactly. And it's fascinating in the novel. And I want to get to all this. So let me ask you a couple more questions. Another of the themes of the book is motherhood and what it means to be a mother. Lore in Laredo is a mother. Lore lives half of her life in Mexico City, DF. It isn't, but she is a stepmom. And the themes of, you say, you have another wonderful line, which is, motherhood is the thief you invite into your home. The thief you invite into your home. What do you mean by that? Again, I get chills reading that.
Well, I wrote that line after I became a mom. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that many, like, I always hesitate to speak on behalf of all mothers, right? Because our experiences can be so different. So I'll speak on my own experience there. But, you know, I think that, my life transformed so dramatically when I became a mom. And I think many of ours do. I think that in so many ways, we are simply not the same people that we were before we had children. And that's physically, it's emotionally, you know, it's chemically immediately afterwards. You know, we might become unrecognizable to ourselves, which is this fascinating thing to have happened from a creative perspective. You know, it's sort of as it was happening to me the first time with my 4-year-old, which was, you know, I was drafting this book. I think there was a part of me that was experiencing these transformations, and another part of me, the creative part, that was sort of like observing them from a distance and wanting to write about them, but unable to in those moments because there was just no time. And that was, you know, I think when you have very young children, you know, in infancy and then now in toddlerhood, which is this whole other level, is that they are just 100% demanding of you. You know, no hesitation in coming to you to ask for things, no guilt about, you know, about the world revolving around them. That's how kids are. That's how it should be. And yet it's completely exhausting, you know, from a mother's perspective or a primary caregiver's perspective. And so I think that, you know, that line, you know, motherhood is the thief you invite into your home is, you know, kind of referring to this phenomenon of, you know, you feel this intense, overwhelming love for these children that you decided to have in the best case scenario. And yet at the same time, I think that there are so many times when, you know, I miss my life before kids. You know, I miss what I used to be able to do without thinking. I miss the person that I used to be. And so I think that Lore is has felt a lot of these same things. She's further along in her motherhood with her twins being 12. And I think that is part of what brings her to this place. She's sort of in this new place in her motherhood where her kids don't need her the same way they used to. It's not this 100% of the time barrage on, constantly needing her for everything, right? And so there's this space that kind of opens up, and she's still young, she's in her 30s. So there's a space that opens up that invites her to ask, well, who am I? Who am I besides being a mother, besides being a wife, besides even being a banker, right? Who am I underneath all of those things, and what do I want? And I think that when that window sort of opens up for her, a lot of other things, come into the picture.
I mean, it's wonderful because what we were talking earlier about how murder happens incrementally, decisions that we make happen incrementally, and you have these crystalline moments where Laura even realizes all I had to do was say no. All I had to do was not go. All I had to do was not dance. When you all read the book More Than You'll Ever Know, you'll recognize these moments that Katie has written so beautifully to show us how the path to being yourself in a different place, maybe, or going into yourself in a different way, or if you had your life to live over, how would you do it? And can you have a chance to do that? And as a result, Laura ends up with sort of two families. Ends up with two families and all the baggage of those. And Cassie too, essentially, has kind of two families that I don't want to go into too much. And what were you exploring there about families?
Well, I mentioned that I, got pregnant at the beginning of drafting the book. And then by the time we were going on submission with the book, or by the time the book is published, I now have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So, I think that my experience with family shifted so much between the initial drafting of the book and then these multiple rounds of revision, that at one point I realized that, here Lore, she's in DF, she's in Mexico City, and she's with Andres, and she's helping Andres' San Carlitos with his homework. And she has this moment of realizing, I'm living this double life, and yet, my double life has brought me right here to a table helping a boy with his homework. And, it's this moment of like, do all roads lead to the same place? For me, is this actually who I am fundamentally as a woman who wants to love a family? Or is it where it leads a woman, right? Broader strokes. But I also, I really saw Lore from the beginning as a woman who very much loved both families. I never saw her as somebody who didn't love her first husband, and that's why this happened with her second husband, because I thought that's just too easy. I think it's much more complex morally, if a woman can still love a man she's with, love her children, and yet make these choices that will ultimately harm them. And, you mentioned she's making these decisions incrementally. I think that, one thing I've been so surprised by as a writer is seeing so many reviews that comment on, the unlikability, right, of female characters who are making questionable decisions, let's say. And then also kind of the propensity of readers to comment on them, like, I don't approve of what she did. I would never do that. And I'm kind of like, well, I mean, you don't have to approve. You shouldn't probably have a double marriage like that. I don't think that's why. I don't think that's why. That's not.
I think it's so interesting because of course you don't have to approve. Of course you wouldn't do it, but you make it be so easy and thought-provoking to understand why Laura did it, why she did, and how she honestly does love both families. This is not a deception of herself; it's a deception of them, and and she understands that she's lying. I mean, this is another thing that you handle so gorgeously, is that she second guesses herself all the time, and there are lines that she doesn't want to cross, and then she does, and she does, and she does. The other thing is also, though, not only how could Laura do that, but how could Cassie do it? How she's also thinking she's a woman. She's expected to be married. She's expected to have a new family besides her birth family, and that's another story. And the new potential family is another story. A loving, wonderful, gorgeous, sweet, everything you could possibly want in a family. And yet she chooses her work consistently from page one. Talk a little bit about that career obsession versus expectations for Cassie.
I mean, I personally always love reading about very ambitious women. I think that I've always been ambitious, and so I've always sort of related to that thread in a story. And so for Cassie, yeah, she has. I think with Cassie, I wanted her decisions and her story to sort of echo Lore's in a way, in terms of kind of these decisions that are made incrementally that kind of arrive at an unexpected place, or a place that could be very easily judged from the outside looking in. But I think that women who are ambitious and women who do put careers before family, are pretty regularly punished in our society and in our culture. Like I think it's still true, but I think it's been more true right in the past than it is today. But it's still pretty prevalent, and you see it, I think, in all sorts of tiny insidious ways, in terms of, you even see it, there's such small things, but when you put your children in school, and it's always the mother who's contacted by the school when the child needs something. It's when orientation hours are set at 2 p.m. on a weekday with this expectation that the mom doesn't work. It's so there are still kind of all of these kind of clues that that women get in our society, that kind of say, if you have a family, if you are a mom, that should be your thing, right? Like, you shouldn't want anything else more than you want to be with your family and provide for your family, in the home, right? And so I think that I just really take umbrage against that, and I wanted to write a character who is who I wanted to write two women, right, in different places of their lives, but who are both making decisions that kind of go against that sort of expectation for women, and kind of explore the consequences, I guess, of those decisions that they make, both in their own personal lives and in the reader's feelings toward them. That's really interesting to me as well to hear about.
I mean, you have these little tiny nuggets of gorgeousness in this book, more than you'll ever know if you are just joining it. Connie says, can't wait to give it a read. Shannon says, this is great. I'm excited to read it. And Darlene says, great interview, hooked. So yay, and you should be hooked. You should not miss this book. You have these gorgeous little moments in the book where someone says, you think that the mothers don't sacrifice anything. I'm the one that gets the cold shower. I'm the one, right? Because you all have used up all the hot water, and all those little quotidian things that together can make someone feel that they're trapped in a life that they weren't quite sure what was going to be. I want to go really, really quickly because I don't want to miss your style, your writing style. It's not only the two timelines, but it's the two settings of Mexico and Laredo, Lori in Laredo and Lori in Mexico. And it's so touching to me that Lori is completely bilingual, but Cassie is not. And Cassie's attitude of, she thinks from time to time early on, I don't know what that means, but I'll Google it. When Lori says something in Spanish that she doesn't understand, she just thinks, I'll Google that. And we think that too if we don't understand Spanish, but it makes Cassie be the outsider. And Laura is the one who is fluent and uses the language interchangeably, like you do in the book. And it is such a gorgeous way of revealing who's the voice, and the experience and the worldliness and the difference in the, whether she's Laredo centric or whether she is world centric. And to make her I'm babbling now because this is just so good, but to make her an international banker was a brilliant idea, because of all the things that she needs to know and how she holds her own in client meetings, and people look at her differently when she's talking about the devaluation of the peso and all those kinds of things. Anyway, talk a little bit about that, the setting and the culture and the melding of the dual everything in this book, not only but the two settings and the two languages.
Yeah. So I mentioned that I grew up in Laredo, and that's where my parents are from, and their parents, and then we start getting into Mexico. And so I grew up kind of in this city that, it exemplified duality in a way that I very much took for granted the entire time I lived there. When you go down to Laredo, it is like you are already crossing a border. You have the customs station up on the northbound highway. Anytime you leave Laredo, you have to stop. You have to, say your citizenship before moving on. In Laredo, you're going to see signage that's as much in Spanish as English, more depending on what side of town you are. You're going to hear Spanish probably more than you hear English, and you're going to be assumed to also speak Spanish. And if you don't, you'll probably be a little bit judged, and you'll probably continue to get spoken to in Spanish, because it's this sense of like, this is who we are here. I grew up with customs from both cultures, from Mexico and from America. Every Easter it was cracking the cascarones, the eggs with confetti inside, at the ranch, and every birthday was piñatas, and it's like these little cultural things that you don't even see until you leave the place. The way I left at 17 for college, and I went just north of Austin for college, and I'm in San Antonio now, which is sort of halfway in between. My husband's from Australia, so I've been there a lot. And so, it's a city that is unlike any other place. And it's like two countries, but also like neither in some ways. It's very much its own thing in between the two countries. And, I read a ton growing up. It was, every Saturday we would go to the bookstore, and my mom would let us buy kind of however many books we wanted within reason, because she felt so strongly about our being readers. And in all of that time and in all of those years, I never read a book by a Latina author, except for Sandra Cisneros in 7th grade. And that was the only book by a Latina author I ever read. And I never read a book that was set, I don't even think in Texas, let alone South Texas. And so even though I always wanted to be a writer, and I always assumed that I would one day, I was writing these stories that were all sort of set in these vague, big cities with no names, and the characters didn't have any last names. And, I told myself I was writing, trying to write universal stories for the average reader. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I realized, no, I'm writing stories where the characters can essentially pass as white, and I'm writing it because I'm assuming the average reader is white. And that's pretty messed up. Yes. And so, in my 20s, I started reading, much more broadly by writers of color, and really seeking out Latino voices, and that really changed my own approach to writing, both in the voice, like it sort of set me free creatively in many ways, and then as well as kind of looking at this place that I'd always taken for granted with a more curious eye. And so from that point forward, all of my stories and, any kind of novel attempts were always set somewhere in Texas, and with characters who looked and sounded like me and people I grew up with. And so I wanted to sort of set the book in Laredo because it's a place I never saw in fiction. And it just exemplified, these themes of duality so perfectly. You can't get much better of a metaphor than a border when it comes to this book. So I feel like I just talked a long time about that, but yes.
No, I just want you to know, when I'm looking down here, I'm taking notes, and I wrote, and I don't know if you can see this, but I wrote, crossing the border. Yeah. Crossing the border. When you said crossing the border, I thought, oh my golly, that's what this book is about. That Lore takes a step across the border, emotionally, morally, not only across the border into Mexico, but in every realm of her life, she's crossing the border, and Cassie does too.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant. I love that. I have one more question for you, because we're now like crazy out of time, and all so many questions I have, but let me just ask you one more. And I'm going to skip the earthquake, and you all will just have to read the book to hear about the earthquake and all the other upheavals that take place in this book. Mm-hmm. But one of the things you bring up over and over and seamlessly is the idea that whoever tells the story has the power. Whoever tells the story has the power. And there is no book more powerful in portraying that than More Than You'll Ever Know. Where did that come from? Did you know that before you went in? Did that evolve? Did that burble up when you were writing? Where did that idea come from? Or have you always known that?
That's interesting. I think that line, which is spoken initially by Cassie's mom, I want to say that actually came up in the very, very beginning, when I was first developing the characters, that I tend to do a lot of writing just on the characters themselves first before I even start drafting. And I think I remember writing that line and feeling like it was going to be really central to kind of the book's worldview. But I think it also, ties into like my experience as a writer. I think like as a writer, when you choose point of view, when you choose character, you are choosing how you shape the story. And I think that that's the case anytime we are orally telling a story as well. We're constantly each the power in we constantly each have the power in shaping our own narrative, right? Nobody has a greater power than we do in most cases, or in many cases. But then, as applies to kind of journalism and to the relationship between journalist and source, and we were talking before the interview about Janet Malcolm, and her book was really sort of central to my development of Cassie as a character, and also kind of interrogating journalism in a larger sense. Like I've written nonfiction in various ways in the last, I guess, 15 years. And I'm always aware as I do that I hold a power when it comes to writing about another person, and that power in depending on whose hands it's in and for what intentions can be incredibly liberating and powerful and effective, or it can be very dangerous. So that was an idea I think that I was very conscious of throughout the book, but in particular about the stories that these two women are weaving about their own lives, and then the book that Cassie will eventually write about Lore.
I mean, just standing ovation, standing ovation. I mean, I think about the Janet Malcolm book all the time as a reporter. I've been a television reporter for 43 years. And the idea, Janet Malcolm's idea of the reporter as con artist, that we want you to tell us our story, so we're sort of making you feel like we're your friend.
Mm-hmm.
Really what we're doing is luring the story out of you. But both Cassie and Laura do that in this book, in this gorgeous and so marvelous. And I was so distracted by the fabulous Katie that I forgot to tell you that she's giving away a copy of this book to you all. So if you have not left a question or a comment, do that this very instant, because the wheel of fun will spin, and it only will spin if your name is in the comments. So leave a comment or a question, or just say, hooray, Katie, I can't wait to read this book, or even, yes, I'm going to buy it the instant this program. And we will spin the wheel of fun in just about 2 minutes. But let's take, if you have time, Katie, a question or two from our audience. Let's see what the people who are listening, which seems, Anissa, and I know she'd love this book. When I told her that you and I were talking today, she said, I love this book. I can't wait.
Thank you.
What scene was the toughest to write, and why?
Ooh, yeah, great question. So I think I have two things that are immediately coming for me. One was the earthquake that Hank touched on, which was it was a 8.1, I think, earthquake that happened in Mexico City in 1985. And so this happened in the middle of everything that was going on with Lore and Andres, and it becomes pivotal to the decision to actually marry him. And I think that scene was the toughest, or those scenes were the toughest to write, because it was a real historical event that I was trying to recapture. And so I think, considering the fact that I have done nonfiction, I've done, some amount of journalism, even though it's more of the essay kind, I think I feel very, it's very important to me to do the research and try to get a historical scene as true as I can. And so I felt a lot of pressure in writing those scenes. And then the other scene that's coming to me is at the very end. It's a scene between Cassie, her father, and her younger brother. And it's kind of like the most pivotal emotional scene of Cassie's personal story. And, because her personal story has dealt with domestic violence and the death of her mother, it also felt like this very delicate scene to try to get right emotionally without kind of going over the line in some ways. So I would say those two were probably the toughest in various ways to write.
Yes, I can imagine that. They were very evocative and very thematic throughout. About, you can keep the plates of a lie spinning. As long as nothing goes wrong.
Yeah.
When it does, it can crash.
Yes, exactly. Well said.
Who else has one more question? Did you use real places from Laredo?
I did, yeah. The only real place I didn't use was the hotel. So there is no Hotel Botanica, but I did base it off a hotel in Laredo called the Family Gardens. I don't know if it was a chain or if it was just one, but I sort of used that as like my model in a way for that hotel. But all of the other places that I mentioned, are very real places. And so it's been really fun to have people from Laredo read the book and kind of get their reactions to kind of seeing, our home and our city actually represented in a book, which none of them have before. And so that was another thing that felt sort of delicate to me, was writing about, a real city, a real place, the place that I grew up in, using real places. I wanted to, again, represent it as truthfully as possible from the characters' perspectives. And I wanted, at the same time, for my own sort of affection for the place to come through. And so even though I don't in any way think it's like a perfect city, but I don't live there. But yes, all of the places except for the hotel are real.
And the affection for the city and the understanding of the city comes through really marvelously in this book. The whole thing is incredibly touching. Shall we take one more question? Shall we do it? Is there one more question? Was this always the title? Yes, this is fantastic question, Shannon, because that is a gorgeous title, and we understand it throughout. Was that always the title?
No. So I had, I think, maybe 3 very bad titles before it, but when I reached the line, so if you read the book, you'll see when that line is used. And when the line is used, I felt immediately that was the title and that it worked from so many different perspectives, because I needed a title that would sort of capture both of their stories and these multiple sort of themes that the book was grappling with. And so when I wrote that line, I felt like, oof, this is it. And so I used it. And then from that point forward, it was always the title.
And you can understand, you all, that more than you'll ever know will mean like I love you more than you'll ever know, meaning I can't even tell you how much, or I'm not going to tell you the rest of the thing. There is more to this than you'll ever know.
Right.
And that it brings tears to my eyes. Diane says, hard to put down once you start reading. Yes, it is. And I had that wonderful experience myself. Let us spin the wheel of fun to see what lucky reader will win more than you'll ever know. And here we go. Katie hasn't seen this before, so this is pretty great. I do think we need music. I agree with whoever said that. Whoever says we need music to go.
Ooh, that's dramatic. Okay.
I don't. That's very funny music for this. It's Renee. Renee, her school is Tesla, and I know she is a marvelous reader and a big fan. So we're very pleased that she has one. She's a devotee of prime time, and I'm glad that paid off for you.
Oh, good. Yay.
Before I let you go, before I say thanks, let me remind you all that next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET, as we always have a terrific book, next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET, we have another Katie Tallow, whose new book, Poison Lilies, is just out. And I am going to start this book tonight, but we don't have books on prime time that you will not love and that have not been vetted. And I cannot wait. Katie Tallow is one of my favorite authors. And I can't wait to read this book. So I hope you will join us next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET to hear all about Poison Lilies. It sounds good, doesn't it? It's about secrets. Of course, they all are about secrets, and that's what we rely on. Katie, you are such a rock star. Congratulations on everything.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. I hope you get a chance to look at the comments when we're done, because there's so much approval and so much applause and so much just joy about and enthusiasm about your book. And I know you made many, many new fans here today.
Thank you so much.
And we love that. Thank you, Katie. And thank you all too. You want to say thank you. I don't want to cut you off.
Yes, no. Well, I want to thank you, first of all, for inviting me. And then thank you to everybody who came today. I've been kind of trying to keep an eye on the comments, but then also getting very distracted. So, I'll be looking at everything afterwards. But I appreciate everybody who came today. And Hank, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. I absolutely loved it. You know that we've been talking about More Than You'll Ever Know by Katie Gutierrez. Do not miss this book. And you I missed you over the week, but I will see you next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET. And remember, until then, it is always safe inside a book. And we'll see you next week.
Love that.